everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Today we're talking about the worldwide catastrophic flood. And next week we'll talk about fossils. But we have to get through the flood because that's what created the fossils before we can really talk about that. Okay? Now remember from last week, we were talking about the why millions of years and evolution is such a big topic, and it's what I call the Genesis 3 attack. So the attack of sin is to question the authority of God, and then there's a lie. Okay, so the question the authority of God, did God really say that he created everything in 6 literal days? And did he really say he flooded the entire earth? So that is what is under attack. Okay, and then there's the lie. It's the lie of evolution and the lie of millions of years that comes up. And why is that important? Because in this schematic, you can see that if you take out the 6 days of creation, you take out Christ. And that is Satan's whole goal. Okay? So today's challenges is what we're going to talk about was there a worldwide flood? Okay, let's look and see what the Bible says. How long did it last? What's the geological evidence? Remember we talked about real observable evidence. And what are megasequences? You guys might not have heard of that term before. And then we'll talk about Noah's Ark and the flood legends around the world. Okay, so hermeneutics. You have to look at the text and interpret it according to the text in context, okay? In 60 different times in the flood account, there's words that express totality, meaning a global flood, not a local flood, okay? The earth, meaning totality, the entire earth, 46 times. All flesh, 12 times. Excuse me, under the whole heavens, 6 times in the Old Testament, outside of the creation, the flood account, and it always means the entire earth. Okay, the word deluge is referred to 13 times, and it always refers to a global flood, not local. Okay? In Psalms, I'll give you a verse from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then something Jesus said. In Psalms, it says, "He set the earth on its foundations. It can never be moved. You covered it with the deep as a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took to flight. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys to the place you assigned for them. You set the boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth." And that is in Psalms. That's talking about the global flood. In 1 Peter, long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built, in it only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. That's a pretty specific detail. In Matthew, Jesus says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark." So clearly, Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus, this is just a couple. There's several different verses, all indicate real history, okay? So the global flood was real. It was historical. Now the timeline of the flood, okay, everybody kind of thinks 40 days, 40 nights. Even ask people that are not Christians and they will believe, 40 days, it rained for 40 days. That's not entirely it. So 40 days was when the ark actually lifted off, okay? The ark was not built to navigate, let's say. Okay, it was built for survival. They got in it. They didn't have to power it on to move it. They didn't have to steer it. They didn't have to do any of those things. It was just for survival. 40 days was when the ark actually lifted off the water because it's raining so hard for 40 days, catastrophic rain. Okay, at day 150 is the peak of the flood, and there's geological evidence to show that at day 150 there was the peak of the flood. We're going to look at the geology of that. Okay, so there's biblical confirmation of the flood. Noah's Ark was seaworthy. We can tell that from the text because the water rose and lifted the ark. So we know it was a seaworthy vessel. The geological record, it states that the water covered the highest hills, over 20 feet. And that is in the text, that it covered the highest hills about 23 feet. They use cubits, of course. The fossil record, well, all land-breathing animals died. That's what the fossil record shows. Okay, so that's confirmation. And then there's DNA evidence now, because of what they're researching and all the technology have, that there was only 8 people that we all go back to. That's in our DNA. They're doing not only mitochondrial DNA, but they're doing Y chromosome DNA. And the Y chromosome is tracking the males, and it goes all the way back to a bottleneck. And how is that? Well, because the flood. Only 8 people survived to create all of us. Now, we all go back to Adam, but at some point, there was this, they call it a bottleneck, where you have all of this information, and then the bottleneck goes short, and then it comes back out again. Okay, that's the DNA evidence. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. Okay. So I think we have a few videos. Whoops.
Explosion in space, or 100,000 years ago this happened or that happened, or even in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Question, how does anyone know? I mean, was anybody there to observe it? Well, actually somebody was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Check this out. First of all, we need to recognize that there is a huge difference between observational science and historical science. Both are valuable, but very different. Let's define the two real quick, shall we? Observational science is simply when we observe something and experiment to draw conclusions. It involves repeatable experimentation and observations in the present. It's through observational science that we find cures for diseases and build space shuttles, stuff like that. Now, through historical science, we consider things that happened in the past, but they cannot be checked in the same way. I mean, we don't have access to the past like we do the present because, well, it's gone, right? All we really have is speculation, or at best, circumstantial evidences of past events based on what we see in the present. That's not to say that we can't make intelligent guesses about the past or form reasonable inferences from rocks or fossils in the present, but we certainly cannot directly test our conclusions because we cannot repeat the past. Got it? So, does that mean historical science is unimportant? Not at all. Let's drop an example down here for a minute and take a look at the Eiffel Tower. You know, that 19th century Parisian monument designed by Gustave Eiffel that stands 1,063 feet tall, which was built as the entrance for the 1889 World's Fair and is still the tallest building in Paris today, visited by millions of people each year? Yeah, that one. Well, guess what? Everything I just told you is true, but how do we test it? Well, applying observational science, we can, of course, observe the Eiffel Tower anytime we're in Paris. It's here in the present. Then we can continue by testing the height and comparing it to all the other structures in Paris and confirm the claim that it is indeed the tallest building in Paris. But that's the extent of the kind of facts that can be proved by observational science in reference to this claim. How do we really know that Gustave designed it? How do we really know it was built in the 19th century as an entrance to the 1889 World's Fair? How do we really know how many people visited? That's all in the past. It can't be repeated. For that kind of information, we need to go outside the limits of observational science and discover what has been communicated to us through historical documents and eyewitness accounts. And furthermore, we have to believe those eyewitnesses and documents are trustworthy. The same is true when we talk about the origin of the Earth. The Earth is here. We all agree with that. So, does observational science confirm that the world was created by God? And are there trustworthy documents and eyewitness accounts that confirm it? Well, let's take the last part first. In short, what we're really asking is my original question, was anybody there to observe it? The answer is yes. God was there, and he told us how he created. He inspired people to write down his very words that became books that were compiled into a complete book called the Bible, which has been verified over and over again and has demonstrated itself to be totally trustworthy in all it claims and teaches. Even secular scholars will concede that the Bible accurately records historical events. Anyway, we have the most trustworthy revelation from the most trustworthy eyewitness. Now, what about observational science? Does it confirm the Bible? Yes. And what's extremely important to realize is the observable fact that the universe is logical and orderly. That makes sense only if its creator is logical and has imposed order on his creation. It doesn't make sense at all if the universe is just an accident of a huge explosion. Also, our minds are able to comprehend many things about the universe, and that's only possible if the creator of the mind gave us the ability and desire to explore the universe. It doesn't make sense if our brains are byproducts of chance because we couldn't trust their conclusions to ever be accurate. And lastly, it only makes sense that we can observe and repeat an experiment if the universe consistently obeys the same laws from day to day, which only makes sense if a lawgiver created it that way and upholds it. So to be bluntly honest, science itself, whether observational or historical, is only possible because God exists and the Bible is true. I could go on, but enough said.
So that was the difference between historical and observational science. And we're talking about observational science when we talk about the geological record. But also the historical science, even if you caught it, even secular scientists will agree that the Bible is a good, trustworthy historical document. So what would we expect to find? We'd expect a worldwide flood to reshape the entire geology of the world. We would expect to find rapidly deposited sediment layers, okay, across the whole entire continent. If the whole world's flooded, you expect the runoff to be over the entire continent. And then this is, they had a little jingle, Answers in Genesis, a song, I think Buddy Davis created it, and it's billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. That's what you would expect to find in a biblical worldview. So let's look at the evidence and see what we find. Okay, before the flood, and biblical and secular scientists will agree that before we have Pangea over here. And now we have this, okay? And it looks like a puzzle. It looks like it goes back together. And when continental drift first came as a theory or an idea, it was totally scoffed at. They really were like, come on, the continents don't move, that's ridiculous. Well, then they realized that, oh, they do move, and we can actually measure it. But this is what you're taught in school, that the continental drift, you know, this is, you have to memorize 25 million years ago, it looked like this, 150 million years ago, it looks like this. Were they there? Anybody document this 150 million years ago? 100 million years ago, and then today. Okay, so they put these arbitrary time up there. It's totally arbitrary, okay? The way they get this is by doing the measurements, and today, when they measure the rate of it, it's only moving about between 2 and 15 centimeters every single year. So then they take it backwards over millions of years, and that's where they get those dates. However, Dr. John Baumgartner came up with this theory, and then we test the theory. That's real science. And you have ocean crust and you have continental crust. Now the ocean crust over here, take a look at this. So it's called runaway subduction. Subduction just means under, right? Submarines go under, subduction. This ocean crust is going under the continental crust. Okay, when the fountains of the deep broke open, there was massive earthquakes and this subduction, because is what happens is this is slowly going down under here. That causes earthquakes today. Well, as it's moving, it heats up, and the hotter it gets, the faster it moves. It becomes, let's say, slippery. Okay, so then it becomes more and more slippery as it gets hotter and hotter, and then it just takes off and sinks. Okay, so when God said he's going to destroy the entire earth, he actually destroyed the earth. The continental crust, the oceanic crust. This oceanic crust, they believe, is completely new. Okay, and secular scientists will actually, when they go and they date the things, that the ocean crust is younger than the continental crust because it's completely new, because this went flying down under there. Okay, here's another schematic. Okay, they did the calculations, they put it all into a computer model, and they come up with this thing was moving meters per second, not centimeters per year. Okay, so these plates, it was catastrophic plate tectonics, is what they've termed it. Okay, and it's all because of the subducting plate, going right here, the subduction plate going really, really fast. Okay, now, if you notice, and you probably already know this, like the Ring of Fire, you've heard of the Ring of Fire, okay? All of the earthquakes and volcanoes generally stay on these plates. Okay, there's 7 major continental plates, and there's, I think, 20 regular continental plates. The interesting thing is that none of the other planets have these continental plates, just the Earth. Okay, and then there's even an idea that right at the fall, when sin came in and it destroyed everything, even down to our DNA, right? It actually started the process of cracking up these plates. Okay, now here's just one more video, real quick.
Miles east of Japan, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake rocks the ocean floor. This disturbance causes a transfer of energy from the seafloor to the ocean, generating a series of ocean waves, known as a tsunami. In about 20 minutes, waves strike the Japanese coastline. Other nations go on high alert because the tsunami will propagate or spread throughout the Pacific Ocean. As the tsunami radiates outward from Japan, it encounters a variety of ocean features, such as ridges and underwater volcanoes, which guide the tsunami and create a complex pattern of scattering and reflective waves. In 8 hours, the waves reach the Hawaiian Islands, and in 9.5 hours, they hit the west coast of the United States. In 16 hours, the tsunami reaches the Indian Ocean and New Zealand, and by 22 hours, the entire Pacific Ocean had been affected. The impact of a tsunami can be highly variable because of the complicated interactions with ocean features and coastline elements. Wave height and speed will differ from place to place. Since tsunamis can be hundreds of miles long and travel thousands of miles away from where they originated, they are considered a worldwide threat when they form.
So that was the, you probably remember, 2011 tsunami, and that was one earthquake, and it was a 9 on the Richter scale, which goes to 10. It's probably not even on the Richter scale, these earthquakes that were happening during the flood, because it's ripping the plates apart super fast. And so the tsunamis that happened was like a wave-like, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute, but it was a progressive flood. So it's not like it rained and then the water was just there suddenly. It was a progressive flood, flooding the earth, they think about 6 different times. And that's these mega sequences, okay? Rapidly deposited sediment layers are across every single continent. And again, there are these PhD geologists that have done real research, okay? Dr. Tim Clary, he was an oil geologist for a long time, and so he has access to all of the oil wells. When they drill them down, they have a core of all of the different layers they go through. And so he just decided that he's going to categorize that, put all of that data into a computer and just crunch the numbers and let's see what we find, okay? Which is how you're supposed to do science. So in the 1960s, they came up with this idea that there's mega sequences, because this is kind of what the evidence is showing, that there was floods. But the secularists will never admit or agree or even see that there was a worldwide flood, one worldwide flood. So they came up with these 6 different mega sequences. And when you look at all of the different rocks, the sequences, you have all of the big boulders and big rocks and stuff kind of settling out first in a flood, and then it gets smaller and smaller as you go up, okay? And then these tiny grains of limestone are on the very top. And is what they found, this is just a schematic, there's about 6 different ones. And in between here, there's what they call unconformities, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, and where it's like it starts over again, and it starts over again. Well, those are the 6 different sequences where they say 6 different times there was a big flood on these different continents. Okay, so here is their schematic, kind of a strange graph, but these are their millions of years on this side, and then this is how they say there was just all of these different floods going along. And then these are the mega sequence names. Well, the creation scientists who are going around and looking at the rock layers and seeing where the limestone layers are, and it's the same limestone layer all across the entire continents at the same level. And that means if the same thing is happening on every continent at the same time, that indicates a worldwide flood, okay? Whoops, let me go back to that real quick. I wanted to point out that this is where they get day 50 was the height of the flood, because that's what the rock layers are indicating. So Dr. Tim Clary came up with this schematic. This is the whole world laid out. The United States is over here, South America's down here, okay, Africa's here. And this is the Salk mega sequence. It's the very first initial one. And they go and they do real science and they take cores, and he has done the entire world except Australia to this point. I think he's still working on that. And then you have the next, the Tippecanoe, and then the Kaskaskia, and see it's just layer upon layer. And then now you can really see it because it's bright yellow in the schematic. And then you get to here. Well, now you got to realize that when this was happening, the continents were together, the whole world's flooding, and so that's why it looks like, well, there's nothing here. Well, the whole world was flooded, okay? But if you only have 20 feet of water, think about that on top of the mountains, covered the hills, and then the water starts receding. So you're not going to have much sediment layers at those top areas, okay? Because it was only 20 feet for first of all, and then it starts receding. But this is real observable science. He wrote a book called Carved in Stone, and it's this big fat textbook, and it talks about all of this, and he's mapped it, and secular geologists will look at his data, and the data is good. The data is perfect. They have nothing bad to say about that because it's all really good data. So think about the extinction events and the geological column we see. They put millions of years between each of these, and that's how they date the fossils. We'll talk more about that next week. However, if you look at it as a global flood, at the very beginning of the flood down here, you are flooding the marine coastline, right? And so those are the creatures that get flooded, okay? And then the next sequence comes in and floods. And then the next one comes in and floods. So it's a progression getting higher and higher until day 150, all of the land animals have died. So the fossil record lines up perfectly with this geological evidence of these megasequences. Okay, so there's the floodwaters are rising at the beginning of the geological column with all of these guys, and then the floodwaters start to fall, and then this is post-flood. So the order of the fossil record is not that these things are evolving into these things at all. That is the order of their burial. That is the geological column. Okay, here's just a few fossils. We'll go into more detail next week. But this guy up here is eating dinner when he's fossilized. Okay, this is a jellyfish. How do you fossilize a jellyfish? You can't have a jellyfish laying on the beach and then slowly, over millions of years, he fossilizes. No, you have to have catastrophic coverage of the fossil in order to preserve it. A dragonfly, you can see their wings, okay? This ichthyosaur, a marine reptile, is having a baby. You can see him right there, okay? In the middle of childbirth, and they're fossilized. Okay, here's a school of fish. How could that happen unless there was a catastrophic flood? Okay, that's not going to happen. Just all of these fish just died, and then they were covered up with mud. That's the story we're taught in school. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you, the great unconformity. Remember those layers? You have this layer, and then on top a layer, but there's nothing here. There's no erosion, and then they'll say that there's missing time. That's what an unconformity is. They say it's just a section that there's no time in there. Okay, well, there's no time because it was laid down pretty quickly, okay, days or weeks later. These supposedly are gaps in the geological record. Okay, they're not. They were laid down consecutively. Okay, here is the great unconformity. If you've watched that movie, Is Genesis History? Okay, this is Dale Hackett, and this is Dr. Steve Austin, and they're looking at the Grand Canyon here. This is what they consider to be pre-flood rock here, like bedrock. And then this is when the flood starts laying down. And this is at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You can see that great unconformity. The great unconformity actually goes across the entire, the whole world. You can find it. Okay, here's just a line here. And so this is like the bedrock, and then this is the flood layers being laid down. And you can find it all over the world. Okay, here's a fun quote about the great unconformity. The great unconformity represents a 1.2 billion year gap in the rock record, a gap that is largely a mystery for scientists and one of the largest missing pieces of time in Earth's rock record. How do we account for thousands of feet of missing rock? Where did it go? Was it ever there in the first place? These are the questions geologists grapple with to this day, because they're looking at the evidence and trying to force it into millions of years in evolution. Okay, if you just look at the evidence, it looks like this layer was laid right on top of that layer, like right away. No time missing. Okay. So moving on to the next thing is folded rock. These are some of my favorite things. And now rock, if you're going to fold rock, it's going to break, right? Okay. But if you fold rock, well, sediment layers, which is just like the sand and the limestone, when it's still wet, it's not going to break and fracture. And you can look at these rocks, and geologists will study them, and there's no indication that they're broken or fractured. And these are just beautiful. Okay, sediments will harden in maybe months. If it's super wet, days, hours, it hardens very quickly, not millions of years. Okay, here's one in Crete. It's just beautiful. You can see all of the different, this is not one layer laid down millions of years later, this one laid down, okay? This was all laid down when it was still wet. Here's in Canada, the mountains in Canada. You can see the nature of these, right? You can see it. Next time you're up in the mountains, just go look. You can see it, the folded rock everywhere. Okay, in France, some more folded rock. This did not happen over millions of years. This happened all at the same time and hardened when it was still wet. Another one in Ireland. It's all you have to do is Google folded rock, and there's just lots and lots of pictures, and they're beautiful. Here's one in the Grand Canyon. So it's kind of swirled here, and then it kind of makes this up here. Can you see that? So this is all folded. These ones are coming up. This did not happen over millions of years. This happened when it was still wet, the only explanation. So if you look at the Grand Canyon, kind of from the top, okay, it looks like a giant washout, right? A lot of water made this super quickly. Not the Colorado River going down millions of years, carved its way down. Okay, there's no real observable science to support that the Colorado River made this thing. Okay, at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you would expect to have all of this sediment flushed out into the water. It's not there. Okay. Here's a picture of Shiprock. We just went on a little tour of the Grand Canyon, and we saw Shiprock. And this is interesting because this is kind of from a mountain up top. We see Shiprock here, and then you see this ridge around it. Okay, this is like the throat of a volcano. Kind of the same thing as Devil's Tower up in Wyoming. Just another kind of closer up picture. You can see the rim. It's this really massive structure. And then here in the petrified forest, these are different layers. The picture you can't really project very well, but right down here, there's all of these petrified trees. And then here's kind of a close-up. If you've ever been down there to see all the petrified wood, it's just beautiful. These chalk beds are also another indication that there was a worldwide flood. Okay, the chalk beds are created from calcium carbonate, and that's from like marine creatures, right? Lots of marine creatures. And these chalk beds are eroding. You can see it over here on the right, how it's falling into the ocean. Okay, if these were created millions of years ago, slowly, layer upon layer, would they still be here when we can see the erosion happening today? Did you know there's chalk beds here in the United States? Tennessee, Nebraska, there's some in Kansas, there's probably some in other places that I don't know about. But there are chalk beds here, and it's the same layer of chalk laid down at the same time over the whole world. Okay, this is one in Nebraska, and how could this still be standing if this is millions of years old? You can see it eroding today, right? Wind and water erode it. The arches is another thing that wind and water erode. Okay, you can measure it. They can see these things falling. This is not millions of years old. It would not be here if it was millions of years old. It would have completely eroded away by now. Okay, critical thinking skills. So let's talk about the actual ark. It was seaworthy. Okay, we know that from the Bible. Okay, the water rose and lifted the ark and kept them safe for over a year. Okay, they were on the ark for over a year. 370 days they were on the ark. So they had to have a super, super well-built ark. Okay, it was not this at all. Not this at all. Super cute, but this is kind of making fun of God's judgment, right? The flood was a terrible, terrible judgment on how wicked man had gotten. So it was not this, okay? The storage capacity was 522 boxcars, roughly, and it could take about 125,000 sheep on board, okay? Sheep, they chose probably because that's probably the actual average size of the animals they took on board, the sheep. They didn't take a full-grown T-Rex on board, right? They took the juveniles. Well, actually, they didn't take anything. God brought the animals to them. Okay, just like migration happens, right? How do the butterflies know to migrate? How do the birds know to migrate? Migration is a thing that animals do, okay? So that is something God built into them. So God's the one, it says in Genesis, who brought the animals to the ark. Noah did not go out there and rope them and drag them into the ark, okay? They came all on their own. God told them to come, so they came, okay? And this is all the answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum. They've done all the calculations, and they built the ark. And so how did they fit all of the animals on the ark? This is there we go.
Camels and llamas, so different and living on different continents, yet able to breed together and produce young. Examples abound of species that can be bred together. Zebras with horses, tigers with lions, potatoes with hot peppers, and so on. This amazes biologists. Based on modern rates of change, new species should quickly lose their ability to interbreed with other species. So, modern species that interbreed must have formed recently and rapidly. It's amazing that camels and llamas, though separated by oceans and thousands of miles, came from the same parents in relatively recent times. So how could such major changes have arisen so rapidly? This is a mystery to biologists because they don't see such widespread rapid change today. And they don't know of any natural process that can create the biological information necessary for such changes. The biblical account of creation may provide the answer to this mystery. Breeders have long known that domesticated plants and animals possess a huge reserve of information that can produce a stunning variety of shapes and functions. Most modern dogs, for example, came from just a handful of breeds in the 1600s. And these dogs have a wide range of features that suit them for a wide variety of environments, from sledding at the poles to hunting in the desert. And none of that variety was put there by humans. The information was already built into the dogs. Such variety of information can be found in cattle, pheasants, pigeons, apples, orchids, and many other domesticated plants and animals. If all the non-domesticated animals on the ark had this same wealth of information, then we could understand how a single pair of cats could produce all known cats. Today, crossbreeding between domestic cats and wild cats, between cougars and leopards, between lions and tigers indicate that all modern cat species are the same created kind. The original cat kind carried all the information necessary to build the variety of cats we see today. But where did this information come from in the first place? The Bible reveals that God created all the animal and plant kinds in the beginning. And we're now learning that God placed a huge amount of information within each created kind, allowing them to diversify into the myriad of plants and animals we see today. The information was there, all there, right from the start. This is not evolution from a lower form of life. It's creation by an all-knowing, all-powerful, infinitely wise Creator who is worthy of our worship and praise.
So when they built the ark in Kentucky, they had scientists do all the calculations of how many different kinds of animals do we have. So you don't need lions and tigers. You just need one cat kind. That would be two. Okay, you need a dog kind. You need a horse kind, a llama kind, a zebra kind, or no, zebras or horses. So you just need kinds of animals. Kinds are not species. Okay, that classification system, a human made. Okay, God didn't make that classification system. It's super handy, right? God created all these animals, and then we like to classify them and order them, okay? These are all different kinds of animals. So they've estimated there's about 1,400 different kinds of creatures, including insects and everything, okay? So how do you fit all that on the ark? Well, they have shown that you can fit all of that on the ark, and that's the whole point of them building the ark, is to show that it is possible, okay? And there's about 7,000 animals total that could fit on the ark. And you got to think, some of these kinds of animals, like 7,000 animals, well, some of them are tiny, small creatures, okay? They're not all big, giant animals like elephants and giraffes and stuff. They're small. So that's Noah's Ark. And there's a book called Echoes of Ararat by Nick. Oh, I'm not even going to try to say that name. But almost every tribe that has historical data that's with the tribe shows there's a flood legend, that there is echoes of Ararat. You know, the ark landed on Mount Ararat, so that's where they get the name. But it's over 300 legends. I'm going to share a few of them with you. But they don't talk about a local flood. They talk about a global catastrophic flood happening. Okay, and it matches Noah's flood and the biblical account, not exactly. You wouldn't expect it to match exactly. You would expect it just to match at a few points so you could recognize the story. Okay, here's a chart. I won't take too much time on this, but these are all the different areas, like man's in transgression, there's divine destruction, people are saved, and then these are all the different cultures. This is just a handful of them. All of the lighter green color here is a full representation of the biblical story. These half triangles here is just a partial representation of the story, and then the white boxes mean that it's just missing entirely of it. But let me just give you a few of these. Like in Hawaii, there's a flood story that tells of a time when long after the death of the first man, that would have been Adam, okay, they recognized that there was a first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place. Only one good man was left, and his name was Nu'u. Kind of sounds like Noah. He made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. Okay, so this flood legend is just reminiscent of the original story, because after they get off the ark, they take those stories with them, but they change over time. Do you remember Grandma told me that story? Grandpa told me that story. Great-grandpa told me that story. And they're trying to remember the details. So they get the gist of it, but they don't get the details perfectly. Okay? In their legend in Hawaii, the waters came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nunu and his family were saved. Totally reminiscent of Noah. They used a canoe. Would a canoe be even viable? No. But the biblical boat could float. Okay? It's the only one in all of these legends. It's the only vessel that actually is seaworthy. Okay, in Canada, God sent a flood because people became completely disobedient. But a good man named Ketchian built a large raft on which he boarded all of his family, as well as a pair of all the birds and all the animals. He sent out a raven and a dove, the latter of which returned with a piece of clay in its legs. Okay, little different from the biblical story of the olive leaf coming back. He concluded that the earth was quite dry, and he landed. And the Western Cree, which is just another section of this Indian group, they recognize the rainbow as the mark of life, a sign that the Great Spirit will not again destroy the earth with a flood. Super, super interesting that these flood legends are over the entire world. The entire world. In China, Fuji and his wife, his 3 sons, and 3 daughters escaped a great flood. That's Noah and his family. Okay? They were the only people alive on earth, and then they repopulated the world. Okay? Now, what's interesting about the China one is that here is their depiction. Remember, they have pictures for their language. And here's the picture for ship or big vessel. And it's comprised of ship and 8 people. This is all over the world, that there was a great flood. Okay, there's no other explanation that all of these different cultures that don't, talk to each other, well, now we do, but, back then, they didn't talk to each other. They all have flood legends because it came from the original 8 people that were dispersed and kept telling their kids and their grandkids about it. Okay? So we shouldn't be surprised at all that the geological evidence agrees exactly with God's word and is affirmed by Jesus. This slide here is the worldwide Tapete sandstone. And this is just showing the United States and how this sandstone layer completely covers the United States at the same level. Okay, remember, they're doing real science here. And that's what I want you to really take away from today, is that the geology, the rocks themselves, are showing that there was a catastrophic flood. Okay? The 6 mega sequences are because it was like the tsunami, right? The tsunami comes in, and then it kind of goes back out. And then it comes in again, a little bit farther, because those tsunami waves are generated from all the earthquakes. Remember, God's destroying the earth? Okay? All the volcanoes, all of that really, really happened. Catastrophic. Remember, meters per second is how fast these plates were moving apart. Okay? So now they're only moving a little bit, because it's like they kind of put the brakes on 4,000 years ago, okay? And so they are slowing down. In Deuteronomy, it says, "This day I will call heaven and earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him." Okay, we have a choice to choose life. Just like the people of Noah's day, they had a choice. You want to get on the ark or not? You have a choice, okay? Don't miss the boat. Choose life, okay? Every day we have a choice, okay? Choose life. These are my resources that I get my videos and my information from. So we'll do questions now.
The sandstone layers that you're talking
Uh-huh.
about, is that the one?
I don't know what the Calhan layers exactly are. But yeah, those layers would have been created probably from the flood. But see, that's the sandstone layers, the limestone layers, because it's the way that they kind of settled out. Yeah, all that layering. And those are the oil well, when they drill that core, they get that whole sequence. And then they test those rocks. Oh, we found volcanic rock. Let's write that down. We found limestone. Let's write that down. So they just take the data and they let the computer crunch it. And then they get, oh my gosh, the same exact layer at this depth is this layer over here. Okay? Tim Clary, that geologist, tells a story how in the Gulf of America, there is like a 2,000-foot sand bed. And it's way off the coast. Well, they never thought it would be there. Okay? Well, they found it, and there's billions of barrels of oil down there that they've already gotten. But they would have never found it because under the evolutionary millions of years model, it shouldn't be there. That's super neat. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so he was just saying that underneath the Tapete sandstone is where they drill for oil. That's where they find a ton of oil. Mitch? Right, so how did 8 people just repopulate the whole world? So the genetic evidence that they're finding, Dr. Robert Carter is the geneticist that's working on this Y chromosomal DNA, and he's tracking the male chromosome. I might have time before we get to the origin to add that in. But think about it, there was 2 people, Adam and Eve, that populated the entire earth. Okay? There is enough genetic diversity in every animal, every plant. There's enough DNA diversity to create so much variation. Okay? And that is why, we are all one race. There are no races, people. There's none. Okay? There's one race, the human race. Okay, we're all descendants, first of all, of Adam and Eve, second of all, from Noah and his wife. Right? And then their 3 sons and daughters. But the genetic evidence is there. Dr. Rob Carter, if you look into his stuff, nowadays you can Google anything and find. I would stick to the resources that I gave you, or at least confirm it with those resources, because those are super trusted, super biblical. There's a few other side shoots, but if you start going off into the weeds too much, you have to come back and check it. Just double check everything with one of those solid ministry. They have PhD scientists that are solid Christians that are biblical. Just check everything you find with them. Anything else? So does that sound like there was a worldwide flood? Like the real geology? Did that feel like it presented the case for the worldwide flood? Because the hardest thing right now is leaving out information. Okay, I could spend, well, I do spend like a whole month just on the geology. Well, I have to do it in 1 hour. So I just want to make sure I cover everything and do it well, obviously, so that it's convincing that there was a worldwide flood, which is actually pretty terrifying. People don't really want to admit that there was a judgment and God created this flood. Well, he's going to do it again, right? That's what we're studying, right? Revelation. And there's a judgment coming, and we have to choose life. Get on the boat, choose life. You know, Jesus gives us a way, right? The ark was the way to salvation. Jesus is our way to salvation today. And that's why I think that this flood geology, the DNA evidence, the fossils, all of these different sciencey things we're going to talk about is so important to teach people, because it just really confirms the Bible and confirms your faith and allows especially kids to be able to go against the evolution in the millions of years that they're going to be taught as fact. And you don't question it. And it's just, we evolved. And it's throughout everything. It's in games, it's in movies. Evolution is everywhere. But there's no there's really not evidence for it at all. So.
Thanks, Emily.
Any other questions? No? We have like 5 more minutes, so yes. Oh yes, let me put that up. Oh, wrong way. There we go. And they're alphabetical because I didn't want to choose favorites. But honestly, Answers in Genesis is probably your best source to go to, because it puts it into a layperson's terminology really well. They have all of those cute little videos that I've showed. Biblical Science Institute, that is Jason Lisle, Dr. Jason Lisle. He's actually here in Colorado Springs. He's the astrophysicist. His articles are a little more detailed. Creation Ministries International, that's another fantastic one. Creation Training Initiative, I went to their week-long training maybe 2 years ago now, and they're fantastic. Lots of really good information, very easy to understand. And then Institute for Creation Research, ICR, that's in Texas. They also have a small creation museum. People might not be aware of that. And they're really good. They get super technical. Dr. Clary, that did all this work, works for ICR. Lots of the people I reference work for ICR. But they're super technical, and then you go down rabbit holes, and then you learn about, I mean, there's so much information. There's so much geology that confirms a worldwide flood. And there's really none that confirms millions of years of slow, gradual evolution. Just not there. So. I can just leave that up for a while. That's fine. That's what your phone is for. Take a screenshot. Good for you. I'm glad to hear that. Oh, just through their website. I don't think they do the week-long training any longer. But it was really apologetics. Because you can learn kind of what we talked about last week. You can learn as much science as you want. I'm never going to be able to debate a PhD scientist. I just don't have the knowledge. I don't have the the education to do that. So I can science somebody and evidence them to death, but they'll just come back with their own evidence. So it's all worldview. And so that training kind of teaches you that that's the difference between our worldview and the secular worldview. And to have a biblical worldview in everything, even in science, is like the video I showed today. It's really the only logical one. Okay? Because if we're just rearranged pond scum, you can't even trust your own brain because it's just chemicals. Right? There's no reason to trust my chemical soup that's in my head to show me anything. So the biblical worldview that we were created in God's image, we have the mind of Christ. Scripture says that. It's the only reason that we can even think logically about anything. So that training was kind of what that was. Yeah.